The AMT. Welcome to Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. Tonight, the baked apple, New York in the era of global warming, and the coldest place on Earth.
Check this out. This is the entryway to our dorm. Normally this has carpet on the ground and the walls are just normally walls, you know.
Also tonight, satellite pictures in the fight for human rights. We'll get an overview from Google and see what close-ups of Burma reveal. All this plus the watercolors of war by embedded artist Steve Mumford. But first, here are this week's online video picks. As you may know, last week was Coming Out Week. So video number one reminds us that really, it's every week.
You don't just come out once. You come out all the time, for the rest of your life, in countless situations. Dinner parties, vacations, weddings, funerals, bar mitzvahs, meetings, conferences, road trips, holidays, high holidays, Arbor Day. One day I came out on Arbor Day, in places I could not even have imagined.
Our next question is on a topic that got a lot of response from YouTube viewers. Let's watch.
Hi, my name's Mary.
My name is Jen.
And we're from Brooklyn, New York. If you were elected President of the United States, would you allow us to be married? To each other?
A lot has changed since I've come out. A lot more has to change. And it's the very act of coming out, being out, and staying out that will bring about that change. So when the next 19-year-old woman kisses another woman for the first time, she'll think two things. One, this is awesome. And two, I can't wait to tell my mom.
You knew you had seen Hearn Anderson Cooper somewhere before, you just couldn't remember where, right? Video pick number two. Does this Nobel Peace Prize winner look like a man getting ready to run for president?
I'm, of course, deeply honored to receive this award. I want to thank the Nobel Committee, and it is even more significant because I have the honor of sharing it with the IPCC, which is the world's preeminent scientific body focused on improving our understanding of the climate crisis. And it's made up of individuals who have tirelessly and selflessly worked on this for so many years. Tipper and I will go to Oslo, and I will accept this award on behalf of all of those who have been working so long and so hard to try to get the message out about this planetary emergency.
My answer? No, he doesn't look like a candidate for president. With housing, healthcare, Iraq, and terrorism so urgently on our minds, global warming cannot be the central organizing principle of a successful campaign, at least not this year. Video pick number three. Does this look like a man getting ready to run for president?
And now, a visit with former Vice President Al Gore.
Oh, hello. I didn't see you come in. You called me in my trophy room. You see, earlier this week, I won another award, and I have to make room for it. This time, it was the Nobel Peace Prize. I'm trying to find a place to put it, but as you'll see, it's getting pretty crowded. Well, you know what? Why don't I show you around? This is my Oscar. I won it for my documentary film, An Inconvenient Truth. This next award has nothing to do with an inconvenient truth. It's called the Poppy. It goes to that candidate for president who wins the most votes but doesn't actually get to become president. This is my college diploma. It might seem strange that it's in Latin, but then the college was Harvard. Okay. Well, I don't talk much about this one. It's an Adult Video News Award. And I should point out, I shared it with 4 other people. It's for Best Group Sex Scene from the adult version of An Inconvenient Truth. Now, I assume you're familiar with the National Punt, Pass, and Kick competition.
You know, in Red State America, an Oscar and a Nobel Peace Prize are bad things. They're like Alec Baldwin in France. Of course, if Gore really can pass, punt, or kick, then all would be forgiven. Video pick number 4, role reversal. Jim Carrey is a real actor who hasn't won an Oscar, but he too has a cause, Burma.
I want to tell you about a hero of mine. Her name is Aung San Suu Kyi. She's a champion of human rights and decency in Asia, and a symbol of hope to all struggling people. She's also the world's only imprisoned Nobel Prize recipient. Even though she won 82% of the parliamentary seats in her country, she was locked away by the military regime and has been held for 11 years under house arrest. That same military force has destroyed over 3,000 villages in eastern Burma and forced over 1.5 million people to leave their homes. They've also raped thousands of women and recruited more child soldiers than any other country in the world. Even though she's compared to a modern-day Gandhi or Nelson Mandela, most people in America still don't know about Aung San. And let's face it, the name's a little difficult to remember. Here's how I did it. Aung San sounds like unsung, as in unsung hero. Aung San Suu Kyi is truly an unsung hero.
That video has gone viral, just not in Burma, where in a subtle act of censorship, they have simply shut down the internet. And video pick number 5, a slightly different reaction to winning the Nobel Prize for Literature. Apparently, none of the geniuses on the Nobel Committee thought to notify the winner, Doris Lessing, before they told the TV network Sky News, which tracked down the author.
We're photographing you. Have you heard the news?
No.
You've won the Nobel Prize for Literature.
Oh, crap.
How do you feel?
Well, it's been going on now for 30 years. One can get more excited. Thank you very much. Right.
Well,
I'm sure you'd like some uplifting remarks of some kind.
There are other people here, so I just any kind of remarks. Just tell me what this prize means to you.
Well, it's been going, as I say, for 30 years. One can get more excited than one gets, you know.
But this is a recognition of your life's work.
Yes.
Right, which is different than, I know, some other prizes, like the Booker has come in for some criticism for being...
Which one?
The Booker, for being some sort of a horse race, whereas the Nobel Prize for Literature recognizes a life's work.
Well, there you are, you see, you're saying it all for me. Congratulations.
Hello.
I want to get onto the pavement.
Of course.
Okay.
Is there any chance you could talk to the world at 1 on Radio 4 in 5 minutes?
Well, I'm trying to think of something really suitable to say. What do you think I should say? Look, you tell me what to say and I'll say it. Okay?
I couldn't...
Doris Lessing slouching toward Oslo. And those are this week's online video picks. Now let's talk about some of the issues that those videos raise, beginning with Burma. Before we introduce our guests, let's look at a video that places events halfway around the world into our backyard. This is from a panel at the Open Society Institute here in New York.
From Buddhist point of view, suffering Buddhist is not power struggle. We came out to the street just to speak out. We came out to the street just for chanting for peace, for loving kindness, for compassion. Almost 3,000 monks were arrested. 138 people were killed.
Many monks are being detained at the other cities in Mandalay, Mounian, Myitkyina, many other bus.
I arrived in Rangoon on the 25th, which was Tuesday, and on the 26th I was able to observe for 5 hours the last major demonstration that has happened during this wave of protests from Shwedagon Pagoda, which was it started with about 50 people, maybe 100 people. There were maybe 24 monks coming out of the pagoda and people on the street in Rangoon standing there cheering, watching the police leave the scene, and a huge roar went up in the crowd as the police left and the monks came out. From Shwedagon, the group headed down to Sule Pagoda, and the crowd grew and grew to tens of thousands, with the maroon robes going through the center and the white on the side. It was phenomenal. It was really striking, the role of the monks during the demonstrations. It was extremely well organized. We would go for maybe an hour, hour and a half, and then the crowd had grown, maybe things were getting a little bit rowdy. They would say, okay, let's stop. Everybody sat down. They would lead some meditation, some prayer, some chanting. One monk got up and asked the crowd, don't fight, be disciplined, be united and join us. Anyone can join, but we don't accept violence at all.
Joining us now, Maureen Ong Twin, director of the Open Society Institute's Burma Project. She moderated that panel. And Bob Carey, the vice president for resettlement at the International Rescue Committee. Thank you both very much for joining us. Maureen, they call this the saffron revolution that's taking place right now. Why saffron?
I think that's an exotic term. It should really be the maroon revolution. As you saw, the color of the monks' robes are really maroon.
The maroon robes. Yeah. And after all of these years of military rule in Burma and some larger demonstrations in terms of numbers than are going on in recent weeks, why is this one causing so much worldwide attention?
Because it was the first, unlike the one 20 years ago, this was able to be seen worldwide in real time by images that came out from sat phones, cell phones, and just phones. You know, people could talk and be interviewed in real time. That's why. So
technology is helping to make this revolution possible.
And the monks, I should say, to have the monks are the most revered institution figures in Burma, which is mostly Buddhist, almost 100%. And they have the exact number of monks, almost exact as they do the military soldiers.
Wow, so they can go one-on-one, though it may be kind of dangerous.
Well, yeah, one group is armed and the other's not.
Yeah, exactly. What's the role of the International Rescue Committee here? Are there many refugees coming out of Burma?
Yes, there are. We are operating both along the Thai-Burma border and in Malaysia, providing services in refugee camps. We're also assisting in the resettlement of refugees to the United States, legally admitted refugees. And this year we will assist roughly 20,000 in coming to the United States. At the end of the year that just ended, September, just under 14,000 arrived, of whom approximately 200 were settled in the metropolitan area.
That's a lot of refugees in one country, from one country in 1 year.
Yes, but this is after many years where virtually none were admitted. So I think there's been a general recognition that for many of these refugees who have been languishing in camps for upwards of 10 years with little opportunity for work, education, or future, that this is an appropriate response on the part of not only the U.S. but the international community as well.
Where are those camps?
They're up and down the Thai. There are 9 primary camps along the Thai-Burma border, so running north-south.
It's funny because there's a whole debate in this country about resettling refugees from Iraq here, a war that we started, a situation that we created, and they can only get a few hundred to 1,000 admitted. They took in 14 to 20,000 Burmese over the last year.
But that took many years to actually effect. So it was not a process that happened overnight. While having said that, I certainly think the response to the Iraqi refugee crisis has been slow and inadequate.
You know, I'll bet a lot of the viewers hear the name Burma, and they also hear in the news the name Myanmar, and they're confused about which is the real name of the country and why it got changed somewhere along the way.
Well, it's both the real name. It's not incorrect to say either in Burmese, but the fact that the military regime forced everyone to call it Myanmar now to sort of pretend that it's more inclusive. Those of us don't accept it, and we just still say Burma because until the people change the name. It's like forcing everybody to call Germany Deutschland, just because the junta said so.
Recently at the UN General Assembly, the foreign minister of Burma, or Myanmar, came to speak, and there was a big demonstration. Maybe you saw some of this footage on the news. Let's check some of this out. So that's a big deal in New York. A lot more people, maybe a lot more noise than you might generally associate with a country seen as remote here as Burma is.
Yes, I didn't realize they were so loud. That's because of the world watching. A lot more people have, they sort of vaguely know about Aung San Suu Kyi being in house arrest, but then seeing the pictures of the monks being beaten. And remember, the Japanese photographer was also shot right on, the video caught his shooting, his killing in sort of cold blood.
How do refugees get out of Burma? Isn't it a very closed society, kind of a police state?
It is, but the borders along are fairly porous. And having said that, recently the border security has been tightened up along the Thai-Burma border and others as well. But many of these people fled 10 years or more ago and have been languishing in camps for that period of time. Many are Karen and Chin ethnic minorities, many Christians who've been particularly persecuted in those border regions and have been participating in pro-democracy activities for many years. So many have fled the country also by boat to Malaysia or to Bangladesh as well.
Now you're affiliated with the Open Society Institute, which is a George Soros organization. George Soros, as I understand, is reviled in Thailand, at least officially by the government there. He's seen as having ill will toward them. He's blamed for the Asia financial collapse of some years ago. Does this complicate your efforts at all?
A little bit. We try to not sort of pull out the George Soros flag whenever we're doing some activities, and we try to stay a little bit, I wouldn't say under the radar, we're not hiding or anything, but we have many grantees who are at the border, the same refugees and others who have gotten some papers who've decided to stay in Thailand to work on Burma projects.
Now earlier in our video pics, we saw actor Jim Carrey calling attention to Burma. Let's look at his follow-up posted after his original video went so viral.
A couple of weeks ago, I sent you a message about a hero of mine named Aung San Suu Kyi, a brave lady in Burma who won the Nobel Peace Prize and who's often been compared to Gandhi or Nelson Mandela. After she won 82% of the parliamentary seats in her country, she was denied the right to govern and held under house arrest by a military regime that has burned over 3,000 villages, forced millions from their homes, raped and tortured thousands, and recruited more child soldiers than any other country in the world. That message got a lot of attention because a lot of you watched it. Now I'd like to ask you to use that power again by sending your very own email to this address: inquiries@un.org, urging the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to coordinate a strong response by the United Nations Security Council to the situation in Burma. Right there in front of your keyboard, you have the power to help. You're the voice they'll listen to. So please join me, and together we can find the love.
Maureen, do people really have the power to help? Does it matter if somebody in New York sends an email about this dictatorship half the world away?
I think it helps. For one thing, it keeps the topic visible, and I think is really important to keep informed. But what would really help is to send it through the Chinese leadership and say, do not veto a binding resolution in the Security Council.
Does China have an interest in keeping the tyrannical state of Myanmar
Absolutely.
intact?
Absolutely, because China, as you know, is an energy guzzler, right, as it booms along. And Burma has a lot of energy and tons of natural resources, timber and gems, but they're really after the oil and gas.
China and any other country? Are there other powers involved in keeping the status quo the way it is?
Well, I think many, as my colleague here mentioned, the resources are rich, and that certainly has muted the international response from many countries, both in the region and elsewhere.
Well, Russia also vetoed that, and that's very interesting. The Russians have sold Burma a little nuclear facility. Nobody's seen it, so we don't know quite what it is.
A nuclear facility?
Yeah. And they're training Burmese nuclear scientists right now, freezing in Moscow, having to eat that bad food and cold
why
weather.
aren't we hearing about the Burmese bomb, like we hear about the North Korean bomb or the Iranian bomb?
Well, that may be what they're trying to do. You know, so then, especially if you can't prove what kind of bomb it is, they can just pretend they're working towards something like that. They've got more leverage.
Do they claim that they're using it just to develop nuclear power?
Of course, they say, "Oh, it's all for peaceful." You know, They don't even claim; they just ignore it actually. But I don't know officially what they've said, because it's been some time since we've heard the rumor. But then it got confirmed by the Russians, I believe.
Why is this situation so static? So much has changed since this regime came into power like 20 years ago. So much has changed in so many parts of the world, and yet things in Burma seem to stay the same under the same dictatorial regime.
You know, quite frankly, I'm puzzled, and I can see that the international community has simply not focused on this to the extent they might or should. And I think it really needs to be put on the top of the agenda for multilateral discussions and at the UN and elsewhere. Certainly we're seeing that the refugee situation has been largely static as well, that there are millions of Burmese who fled the region and are in no better situation than they were 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
Who are these leaders?
Which leaders? The leaders who are...
The
you mean
people
the
in power, the junta leaders.
Oh, well, number one is General Than Shwe. He's Senior General Than Shwe, who's supposed to be very paranoid, psycho-warfare expert, and basically doesn't listen to anybody, but makes all the major decisions. Then he's got, like 4 or 5 the next rung, but they're not, nobody's as powerful as he is.
You say psycho-warfare expert. This is warfare waged against the people?
Well, I guess he's also, he's an expert in waging warfare against who he seems as enemies, so that includes the ethnic minorities, and maybe his own enemies within the, I'm sure he's used that to keep his own enemies within the junta at bay, because, it hasn't split. This junta has stayed, the army has been unified they've taken over since 45 years ago.
And what kinds of human rights violations are they known for?
Oh, tremendous. So you heard the Jim Carrey talk about the rapes, the relocation, at gunpoint, using ethnic minorities especially as human mind detectors. They own the whole country. They say all the land is ours, and so we can, just remove you if we want the space for anything, whether it's military or they want to build a big house.
And with respect to refugees, are they supposed to have certain rights that aren't being respected?
Well, the refugees in the international sense, Thailand is not a signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention. So what it means is that they really refer to these individuals as guests, and in many respects have been generous, but they do not have the right to remain in Thailand, to work, to have their children educated. So their rights really are very much limited. And it's a reflection of the reluctance of many countries to really engage forcefully on this issue.
And you yourself have been banned in Burma, correct?
Yes. I've been banned since '93.
Here is creative use of the web by a pro-democracy activist in Rangoon who posts as Mong Di. This uses Google Earth satellite imagery to find the home of the Burmese dictator who was just mentioned, Than Shwe. Now let's look at this and, Maureen, talk our way through this. What are we looking at?
Well, this is the Earth.
Google Earth. And then we're coming in gradually, of course, on Burma.
Right. Okay, Pimana is the city near where this new capital that they built using 2% of GDP I believe that was Than Shui's swimming pool. That's the airport. They basically carved this capital out of out of swamps and forests, and forced everyone, the whole government, to move there about 6 a.m. in the morning one morning. They just said, okay, everybody, we're moving, because we think he got the time from the astrologer, said you had to move at that time. So it says Burma military office buildings. Of course, I haven't been there, but I'm told it's very swank, actually. They got 24-hour electricity, which nobody else has in the country. And these are the general's McMansions. There's the Than Shui home, confirmed, it says. So there it is.
And one of the posts that I saw underneath this video on YouTube said, well, now that they know, they should just use this to bomb it.
Yeah, well, I won't comment on that, but there's been a lot of remarks like that, because they're all in one place, after all.
Why did they move the capital?
Well, we don't really know, but we're told that they were worried about an American invasion by sea in Rangoon, which is the former capital, and a commercial capital. So this way they're building tunnels as well, so they can protect themselves.
Would you like to see maybe a United Nations sponsored multilateral invasion to remove this regime and liberate the people, or after the experience in Iraq, is that just too fraught?
Actually, personally, I would love to see it, because you mentioned about the human rights abuses. There is, responsibility to protect. This government is, instead of protecting the people, they're abusing the people, after all. They're torturing all these peaceful protesters they've arrested, thousands of them. They admit to having arrested 3,000. And some of them are associates. I don't know if they'll all make it out of detention.
Does the International Rescue Committee take positions on how else to relieve the situation there?
Well, we are a humanitarian organization, so our position is really focused on protection and basic services to refugees and ensuring that they are able to survive and hopefully to find a solution to their plight, whether it's return to Burma, some type of status where they are, or resettlement in a third country. So from our mandate is very much focused on the humanitarian response.
We see a lot of technology being used in this discussion, that video imagery, the text messaging that helped spur the current saffron revolution that we've been hearing about. Do you see technology helping with the plight of refugees?
Oh, absolutely. It's changed the way we live, as you know, dramatically, and that's no less true of refugees. Certainly with regard to the information flow, I've spent a lot of time in refugee camps, but in recent visits to the Thai-Burma border, refugees do have cell phones. They may not have great coverage, but there is information, and it's flowing globally, and it's flowing in real time. And I think that's a dramatic change from what you would have seen even a couple of years ago.
And with the government shutting down the internet there recently, how much does that stop progress?
A lot. I mean, it's stopped a lot of the images coming out in real time, and this is what I'm worried about. People's, their interests are just so short anyway. So if they don't see any more images coming out, that they're going to lose interest. Yet they're also confiscating cell phones because of the picture-taking ability. So it's gone somewhat quiet, and the Defense Ministry is going to take over only 2 ISPs.
Well, slowly but surely. Thanks to Jim Carey and Bob Carey, no relation.
No relation.
And Marie Nong Twin and others. Word is getting out about the situation, and hopefully something will be done. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Now, in addition to tracking human rights, satellite views let us see climate change worldwide and in our own city. We will discuss that with a representative from Google and a New York scientist. Now, to get in the right frame of mind, let's watch a wake-up call viewed more than 300,000 times on YouTube. This post by Wondering Mind 42 is called the most terrifying video you'll ever see.
So it's a bit like buying a lottery ticket. You buy lottery ticket A or ticket B, and then you sit back and wait to see what the laws of physics deal out as the result on your ticket. So let's say we pick lottery ticket A. At that point, we're determining that our future lies somewhere between a global economic depression and a different but livable world. So here's a scenario where we made a mistake. We acted when we didn't need to. And here's the cost of that mistake, a global economic depression. This is the risk associated with buying lottery ticket A. Well, that sounds like a pretty scary risk, so let's see if we have a better option over here on lottery ticket B. If we pick column B, and it turns out to be the right choice, then hey presto, we're happy. And if it turns out to be a mistake, what would the cost of that mistake be? The end of the world? Well, the end of the world as we know it, the globe will still be here, humans will still be here, the species will survive, but this is a very different, much more hostile place. This is the risk associated with picking column B, whether by deliberate choice or, and here's the scary part, by default of inaction because we were busy debating, trying to guess which road the future would land in. Notice that this cost down here, this consequent, incorporates the threat to the economy that this one up here does, but with some added bonus features as well. Also, it gets worse than that because in the last 5 years, we've learned that it's possible, it's plausible, that this might happen abruptly in a very short time period, perhaps as short as a decade or two. So we're not just talking abstract grandchildren here, we're talking you and me. Now, don't take my word for it on this. Don't take anyone's word for it. Do this yourself. Listen to information on climate change, and when you hear it, ask yourself, are they talking about guessing at rows, or are they talking about choosing between columns? Because I think you'll see that however you construct this, the argument still leads to the same inescapable conclusion, which is this. When faced with uncertainty about our future, the only responsible choice, the only defensible choice, really the only choice is column A in order to eliminate this as a possibility. Because the risk of not acting far outweighs the risk of acting. So, there's my silver bullet argument.
This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. The internet giant Google's got a project to meet the issues with those satellite images we've been talking about. They're useful on many fronts, including tracking global warming right here in New York. Joining us, Justin McCarthy, who can tell us about Google Earth Outreach, and Stuart Gaffin from the Center for Climate Systems Research of the Earth Institute at Columbia University. Welcome to both of you. And Justin, talk about Google Earth Outreach.
Sure. Well, Google Earth Outreach is really, it's part of the Google Earth application, which is a free application that users can use where they're looking at 3D topography, high-resolution imagery, map data, etc. But then there's a feature in there that allows you to put layers on top of Google Earth so that people can upload more information, they can annotate locations, etc. And so what Google Earth Outreach is our effort to talk to the public benefits organizations who may not be aware of this opportunity as a way to further their mission and advocate their causes and the like. So the outreach is really a site that gives people frequently asked questions and guidelines and video tutorials and the like.
So Stuart, do you use this kind of technology at the Earth Institute?
Increasingly. I have been studying New York City climate more and more over the last few years, and that means getting down into the streets and getting all the information we can, and so we are using Google Earth ever more.
Right, so it can be used for an international observation like we saw in Burma a few minutes ago. Can it be used to actually see evidence of global warming here in New York?
Well, for evidence of global warming, we rely probably more on weather stations and long-term data, but to see current conditions and what's causing heat and cool spots in the city, it's indispensable.
Right. Are you familiar with some of how that's being used? Heat and cool spots, rooftops, whatever?
I've just heard a little bit more about it, yeah. And it's very interesting. Just the idea of, again, it's mashing up interesting layered data on top of existing maps. So laymen like myself can take a look at an area and learn something new about them visually.
Right. And what's Earth Institute doing primarily with respect to global warming?
Oh, the array of projects is enormous, and I actually am just involved in the New York City components, but as you probably know, the Earth Institute is working internationally on many fronts, and working in the oceans, in the polar regions, etc. So it's too long to even describe.
Talk about New York City.
Yeah, well, New York City is we are at risk here. We have many threats facing us. Our climate is changing, and we at Columbia, we make forecasts in particular for how rapidly these changes will go in the future, and we're expecting much more rapid changes than we've experienced over the past.
So let's take a look at how else this Google Earth technology might be used. Remember, again, this is using images from satellites in space, and you can zoom down so close you can see your own rooftop if you want to do that. Here we're going to go into the Amazon rainforest, and zoom in to see the environmental destruction there. This is some of the Amazon, or what's left of it.
Yeah, this is a satellite image with a layer on top of it that I previously mentioned, and you can select the opacity of the layer that you want to see as it relates to the existing 3D imagery that's out there. So you can append and annotate different sections of a map and start to explain, this used to be a forest, the density of this forest used to be X, and overlay on top of it images of what's there now, or in this case, what's not there now. So it's a pretty powerful visual interpretation of what's actually happening on the ground.
Now, what about layers like that being used to observe things in New York?
Yes, we do exactly that. We typically overlay the Google visual imagery with a thermal map, which is a map of the temperatures being experienced on the surface of the ground and buildings and so forth. That map comes from NASA Landsat remote sensing imagery, and we find that combination is particularly powerful.
So what would you be looking for?
Well, when we started this kind of work a couple of years ago, we just looked for the 5 to 10 hottest spots on the map, and we went out and started visiting them, and we learned a lot of things about heat sources in surprising ways in some cases.
For example?
Well, one of the first discoveries we made was sports turf fields were showing up ubiquitously throughout the city, and we started seeing very high temperatures on those.
You mean the artificial turf?
The artificial turf fields, right.
Right, because this has been seen as kind of a green revolution in the city by a lot of people in the neighborhoods. They take a lot of concrete playgrounds, let's say 1 square block playgrounds or schoolyards even, and lay down that, rubberized, real grass looking artificial turf, and people are like, oh, wow. So it's got a downside.
Sure. I mean, I fully understand the enthusiasm of the public to getting some recreational space, and we're not trying to deny that. But on the other hand, you can't deny the temperature effects, which are unequivocal and could be, during heat waves, hazardous locations to be.
Recently, a blogger got NASA to change the highest temperature year in the U.S. to 1934 rather than the 1980s. I don't know if you knew about that.
No, I wasn't aware of that.
This is another example of kind of user-generated technology, user-driven technology being used to correct the authorities. And we know it's happened in journalism. It's happened in various walks of life.
Sure.
Well, apparently somebody got a hold of NASA data online and was able to say to a lot of scientists who've been trumpeting the gradual warming of the Earth over the last few decades and say, aha, but the hottest single year was really 1934.
Well, if I could add to that, that is just the U.S. only, the correction.
U.S. only.
Yeah, in fact, that is much less important than the global records, which were unchanged by that correction. So, in fact, we're seeing the hottest string of years since 2001, and that did not get altered by that correction that you just mentioned.
All right, let's go back to the web, and Justin, tell us what we're looking at here. This is a view of the Appalachian Mountains.
Right.
Click right into Google Earth there.
So this is about a small grassroots organization that most people don't get a chance to see, but all of a sudden, this grassroots organization created a layer and started to talk about mountaintop removal mining. In the week that this was produced and put onto Google Earth in a layer into the global awareness folder, what we found that there were 13,000 people had signed a petition from over 50 states and 30 countries. So the message here is small grassroots organization, seemingly local issue that all of a sudden gets more national attention, and therefore some change starts to happen or some activism starts to surround it, which we think is a good thing. As you mentioned earlier, more voices can correct errors and improve data for all of us.
And I understand there's a Brooklyn activist component to something like this. I don't know if either of you are familiar with it, but opponents of the Atlantic Yards project in Brooklyn have been using this kind of layering imagery to show what it will look like and just how different the neighborhood will look afterwards.
That's right. Yeah, actually, I'm a longtime Brooklyn resident, and my first reaction to the issue was, wow, Frank Gehry is coming to Brooklyn, and the Nets are coming to replace the displaced Brooklyn Dodgers who left long ago. But when you start,
there aren't many people, by the way, who get excited both by an architect and a basketball team. So you're a special guy.
It's a cross-section. It's true. It's a niche. But ultimately, seeing it a little bit more, no matter where you stand on the issue, seeing one illustrator's view or his work of creating these models of the buildings and the density and the size and the height and the numbers, frankly. I mean, there's 16 or 17 buildings there. When you go into Google Earth and apply that layer, you all of a sudden see the scale of the project. And you realize it's not just an arena. In fact, it's many, many buildings, very dense, much larger than many of the buildings in that area, and it gives you a different viewpoint.
So what can New Yorkers do to prevent or mitigate the creeping effects of global warming?
Well, we can act on two fronts. One, the mayor is acting on, which is to reduce our contribution to the problem in the first place, which is our greenhouse gas emissions, and he's doing a good job on that.
You heard about the new taxi fleet proposal?
I heard about the new taxi fleet.
They're all going to have to be green vehicles.
Exactly. And so he's making headway on that. On the other hand, we are going to be experiencing a significant amount of climate change in the city and everywhere, so we actually have to learn how to mitigate these effects and reverse the impacts that are going to be coming our way in a few decades. So with respect to things like heat waves, these are going to get more serious. Our predictions at the Earth Institute for the number of days above 90 and 95 are not pretty. So we have to learn to find ways in which we can actually reverse and cool our microenvironment in the city.
We may be past the conversation, for most people at least, as to whether global warming is real. Do you have to have another whole conversation with the public to convince them that it's threatening? Like, given the warm, beautiful October that we've had in New York for most of this month, a lot of people may be sitting back and say, this is global warming? Kind of like it.
Bring it on, right? Well, on the other hand, look at the Chicago Marathon in this month was canceled for the first time in 30 years. I think as these kinds of changes, if they're sustained, are going to bring about profound ecological alterations in the New York environment for us. So will people get concerned? I think there are going to be things that are going to look cute and quaint. On the other hand, there are going to be serious impacts as well.
How could you use Google Earth? What kind of layers would you envision laying over? Like, I'm thinking, a heat map layer for city street temperatures, an ozone hole shadow layer that shows where harmful rays are getting through the most to potentially harm us, pollution indexes. Mexico City takes measurements every day of pollution to determine how many cars to allow on the roads. Maybe things like these could be placed in layers on the maps and people could track them almost on a daily basis.
Yes, right. We do need updating because things are changing constantly. We want to see how these changes are affecting things like the local temperatures and the local meteorology. So yeah, it's really limitless, the number of things you could layer in. In fact, it's a matter of how much resources you have to digest all the information and draw conclusions from it.
So, Mr. Google, could you please do that for us?
Immediately. Well, one of the things we did do, though, is connect people. So that we think that the site and Google Outreach, what it's doing is it's showing people who may have limited technical resources the way to append or to annotate the maps in an easy way.
Justin Stewart, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Sure. Coming up, not just a journalist embedded with the military in Iraq, a painter will see the watercolors of war with artist Steve Mumford. First, one place on Earth where admittedly people might not mind a little global warming. This is a YouTube video seen 53,000 times, posted by Antarctica.
I'm going to show you what it's really like, what a condition 1 in Antarctica is really like. Check this out. This is the entryway to our dorm. Normally this has carpet on the ground and the walls are just normally walls, but we're going to open the door right now. It's a little bit like opening up the door to another world. Are you ready? It's a little bit blowy out there right now.
This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Global warming.
Some say irreversible consequences are 30 years away. 30 years? That won't affect me.
This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. Now a watercolor of a soldier being placed in a body bag in Iraq. Let's see the painting. It's by artist Steve Mumford, who has been perhaps the only painter embedded with the U.S. military there. We will see more of his work and talk with the artist as Steve Mumford joins us in our studio. Hello.
Hi, Brian.
And welcome back. You've been here once before. Talk about the painting that's on the screen right now.
Well, this was in Baghdad at what's known generally as the Baghdad ER. In this case, it was the 28th Combat Support Hospital, who are still there. Their tour ends, I think, in a few weeks. About every, if I had to guess, every couple of days, maybe 3 days, a soldier would die there from his wounds. In this case, he had just been pronounced dead, and they were putting him sort of gently into the body bag.
And you were there?
I was there,
in the ER?
Yeah.
Watching this person pass.
Well, he may have been dead when he came in. It wasn't clear. Usually when somebody's been really grievously wounded and their heart is stopped, somebody's doing CPR on them. So they have to keep doing it until a senior doctor comes in and pronounces them dead. But I'm drawing while I'm there. So I'm kind of like looking down at my paper and looking at what's happening. And when finally they took his body out, and I kind of looked up and got a chance to look more closely at all the medical people, they all had tears in their eyes, which, it surprised me in a way because this isn't a rare occurrence there. But, they're very affected when somebody dies.
You were here, and some of you may remember last year Steve was here to talk about his book, Baghdad Journal, An Artist in Occupied Iraq. Since then, you went back to Iraq again to work and paint in that ER.
Right.
Why do you do it?
Well, I mean, it's very intense and moving subject matter. So as an artist, I guess I've been interested in telling stories about real human dramas now since the war started. And in a way, this seemed to me a kind of an epicenter of that story.
Let's see the next slide. This painting. Well, you just described it.
Yeah, this is something called the Angel Flight. This is actually another thing that photographers are not allowed to photograph, so I had a sort of special access as an artist. When an American dies, and if his unit happens to be around, sometimes they will have brought him in, or whatever medical personnel treated him, they'll bring him out to the helicopter, which will take his body to Balad. And whether it's the day or the night, it turns into this ceremony where the soldiers stand at attention. And I think it gives everybody a kind of a closure on that death.
The color in this painting is a lot different than the one from the ER. Those were in bright, vivid colors. This one is more, it's almost like a sepia tone black and white effect.
That's exactly what it is. It's ink. There's no watercolor in it. It's brown ink, sepia ink. I think maybe mixed with a little black. In this case, a lot of times I would take photographs while I was working in case I wanted to finish the work up later. In this case, they were very definite about saying I was not allowed to take photographs. So I wanted to work very quickly just in ink.
And the Bush administration has banned news coverage of the bodies of dead Americans coming home from Iraq. Do you see your work, this kind of thing, for example, as filling a gap in what Americans need to see to some degree?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Photographers are allowed to photograph people at least being operated on, but I think that they're not allowed to photograph faces without the written consent of the patient. But dead bodies are another matter. And so, I felt privileged to be able to show it. And the 28th Cache pretty much set certain ground rules when I showed up. One of them was that I wouldn't be allowed to draw insurgents who were being treated at the hospital for, I guess, Geneva Convention reasons. And the other was that I wouldn't be able to draw in the morgue itself. But other than that, I wasn't asked any questions about what I was doing.
The displaying of the image of a prisoner is seen as a violation of their rights under the Geneva Convention. You don't think it's for propaganda purposes to stop one of the enemy from being seen perhaps in a sympathetic light?
I don't think so, because if anything, it might have the opposite effect, which is these same doctors that are patching up Americans and Iraqi civilians are also patching up insurgents.
Focusing on the work of the medical staff.
Right.
Yeah. Let's look at another image of yours. And of course, you painted injured and dead American soldiers, but also Iraqis who were treated at the hospital, as you say. And this is an Iraqi woman. Who is she?
I don't know her name, and as far as I know, nobody at the hospital knew her name. She was a casualty from Ramadi who was flown in, I believe it was in March. The insurgents at that time were blowing up trucks with chlorine gas barrels or canisters in them. So the bombs were in effect acting as a chemical attack. And everybody in the vicinity that breathed in the chlorine gas, their lungs would be burned on contact. In her case, she survived the initial burning. There's not much the staff can do other than feed them oxygen and wait. But when she revived, she was brain dead, and her head just sort of moved back and forth, and she couldn't think anymore. So I think she was eventually sent along to an Iraqi hospital, but I don't know if her family even knew where she was.
Having spent so much time in Iraq, so focused on images there, do you think that what you see and know is real over there is very different from what Americans get to see of the war? Is there a visual disconnect between perception here and reality there?
I guess it's hard for me to say, because my head, in a way, is still so much over there. You know, I'm still sort of chewing over, and in fact, up until recently, working on the drawings that I started over there. So it's sometimes I don't really realize, you know, what your average American knows or doesn't know. You know, sometimes when I feel that people take a really negative view about what it's like over there, I always feel like what I encountered there was much more nuanced than propaganda from either the left or the right. So I'm a little taken aback when people make assumptions about the soldiers behaving in this way or that way, just because I find it very hard to make simple generalizations.
Let's see another one of your pieces. This is an Iraqi soldier injured in an IED blast.
That's right. Actually, probably, you know, maybe 60% or more of the people being treated at the Baghdad ER are Iraqis from the army or police forces or civilians, but especially the first two. This is an Iraqi army soldier hit by a bomb blast, which is probably over 90% of the injuries that arrive at the hospital.
It's also sort of timeless Andrew Wyeth stuff in a way.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Andrew Wyeth. He's kind of a maligned figure in the New York art world, but I consider him a genuine artistic influence, along with, of course, Winslow Homer.
And those are all American medical personnel?
Well, no. The two guys who are slightly more dark-skinned and towards the right are Iraqi medical personnel. They have a lot of Iraqis who are there sort of as residents, medical, you know, doing their residencies, or doctors who usually are not allowed to work to treat the American soldiers, but they're there to help and learn the new American surgical techniques.
You were embedded, and there is, of course, American violence. Over the last few days, we've heard about the airstrike in Sadr City, where quite a few civilians were killed. I don't really know if they really killed any of the enemy they were going after. To many Iraqis, that feels like American violence, no matter what the motivation. Are you limited in what you can show being embedded?
Oh, definitely. I mean, not necessarily by anything that I would call censorship, because especially when I was embedded with what they call forward operating bases, where all the missions and patrols leave from, I always had the sense that they were kind of excited to have me there and wanted me to record exactly what they were doing. In other words, they thought they were doing a good job.
Yeah, they believe in what they do.
They do. And even when things went badly, they also wanted the people at home to know what they were doing.
Let's show one more really heart-wrenching painting. This is of an injured Iraqi toddler, and as you see, in his hospital bed or ER bed with his stuffed animals. What's his story? Briefly?
Yeah, they called him Henry. He was a real favorite with the nurses and doctors. And like the woman before, he came in from Ramadi with, I think he came in with 4 or 5 children. He was one of them. 2 of them died the first night that they arrived, and he and another boy survived. Nobody knew again where his parents were, but he had an uncle that lived in Baghdad who would come in from time to time. And the other thing that was sort of sweet about Henry was a lot of the surgeons would stop by during the day and just pick them up and hold them. And it was just a really, kind of a nice moment.
We just have 20 seconds. If your work works, if it does what you hope it will do, what will it do?
I guess I would say that I hope that it actually brings people into what it felt like Iraq is like for both the soldiers and the Iraqis, and that they understand that it's not just a horrible place with bad things happening. It's a lot of different things.
And is there a web address where people can see your work?
Well, artnet.com in the features section.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And to close tonight, a tribute to the 22nd Amendment by artist Andrew Sloat. The 22nd Amendment was ratified after Franklin Roosevelt won 4 terms as president in the Depression and World War II. Back then, Republicans were excited about it. And that's it for tonight's show. We're here live Wednesday night at 7:30, and we're available as a podcast. You can sign up at CUNY.TV. And don't forget my daily radio show, 10 o'clock every morning on WNYC Radio, 93.9 FM and AM 820, and WNYC.org. Have a great night.